I'm 84, and for about 50 years, I probably spent more money in the soap aisle than anywhere else in that grocery store, except maybe the produce section. My doctor, good man, younger than my youngest son, he asked me last spring what I use on my skin these days. I told him I buy it at the hardware store, 52 cents a bar, or I make it myself for about the same. He asked me to repeat that. I repeated it. He wrote it down. That surprised me more than I expected it to. I've put some of this down in the Coleman Remedy book. The link is in the description if you want it. But what I want to tell you today starts long before I ever thought to write anything down. Because here's what 84 years taught me. Most of what I believed about taking care of my skin wasn't there because somebody cared about my skin. It was there because somebody cared about what was in my wallet. And I don't say that with any bitterness. I'm past bitterness. I say it the way a man says something when he's had enough years to know the difference between a fact and a feeling. If you've ever stood in the lotion aisle of a drugstore, looked at 40 bottles with names that don't mean anything, and walked out feeling like you understood less than when you walked in, stay with me a little while. I'd like to know if any of what I found matches anything you've been through. Hit subscribe if you're willing, and leave me a comment below. I read every one of them. At my age, that's not a burden. That's the reason I sit down here. My father's hands never cracked. I don't say that to set up a lesson. I say it because it's the thing I kept coming back to. For 20 years, before I finally understood what I was seeing. Earl Coleman worked that land from before I was walking until he was too old to stand in it. Mornings so cold you could see your breath at 6 o'clock, his hands already in the soil before the light came fully up. Tool handles that weren't smooth, edges that weren't gentle. The kind of work that takes something out of soft hands by mid-morning. And his hands were calloused along the palms, thick at the joints, darkened from the earth the way working hands get. But they didn't crack. Didn't split at the knuckles in January, the way mine started doing when I was in my mid-70s. Didn't bleed. Didn't need anything put on them that I ever saw. I noticed it the way boys notice things without knowing they're noticing. Put it away somewhere without a label, not a lesson, just a fact I was holding. Filed it under things that didn't have an explanation yet. I didn't open that file again until I was 78 years old. Standing at my bathroom sink, rubbing $11 lotion into hands that still ached, along the back knuckles when the temperature dropped. Holding that old memory up next to what I was living and trying to figure out the distance between them. I'd used commercial soap my whole life. Ivory first, same as my mother brought home on paydays. In the 60s, they started making deodorant bars and antibacterial bars, and I bought them the way most of us bought things back then, because the commercial said it was better, and I hadn't yet learned to be careful about that word. In my late 60s, my skin started changing, the way skin changes when a body has been through things. Drier, tighter along the forearms, an occasional itch in the evenings after a shower that I figured was just winter. My doctor sent me to a dermatologist, a careful woman, thorough, looked at my arms the way a craftsman looks at something that needs work. She said I had xerosis, which is Greek for dry skin, as near as I could figure. She wrote a soap brand on her prescription pad. $12 a bar. This was the late 80s. $12 was worth paying attention to. Eleanor came to the pharmacy with me. She looked at the price tag and said, "Arthur, at $12 a bar, you'd better be washing less." That was Eleanor. 28 years a nurse, and she had a very low tolerance for things that didn't add up. She never stopped me, though. She knew I had to find things out the long way. We'd been married long enough that she'd stopped trying to shorten that process. I used the soap. For years I used it. Then I added a lotion because the soap wasn't quite enough. Then a separate cream for my hands because the lotion didn't reach there the way I needed. By my early 80s, I had a bathroom shelf that looked like I was stocking a small pharmacy. 5 products in a row, all of them promising something, none of them quite delivering it. And I still had the tightness, still had the itch on bad evenings, still looked at my hands sometimes and thought about my father, who never needed any of it. I hadn't asked one question, not one. That's the part I find hardest to say plainly. I was a man who built furniture in his own workshop, grew his own tomatoes, kept his own tools in good order. And in that bathroom, I just bought what I was told and kept buying more of it when it didn't work. The itch got worse when I was 79. Not a rash, nothing you'd see in a photograph, nothing a doctor would write down as a diagnosis. Just a low, dry, persistent itch that started every evening about 20 minutes after I showered. Across my forearms, the backs of my calves, like my skin was trying to get my attention. I mentioned it at my next appointment. My doctor said it was common. The skin produces less oil as we age. Apply moisturizer within 3 minutes of bathing, before the skin has fully dried. I did exactly that. It helped some nights, not most. I tried sensitive formula soap, fragrance-free, hypoallergenic, one with colloidal oatmeal in it, which I felt a little foolish buying, but bought anyway because I was out of other ideas. Some of them helped for a week, maybe 2, until my skin adjusted and went back to what it had been doing. I spent, when I figured it up once on a piece of paper, somewhere around $200 a year on products for my skin, and I still had the itch. My neighbor Roy, been next door since 1981, keeps the best vegetable garden on the block, though I've never told him that outright. He came over one afternoon to help me turn the soil along the back fence line. We finished the work, and I was rubbing lotion into my hands, the way I always did after working in the dirt. And he watched me for a moment and said, "What all is that?" I told him. He nodded the slow way a man nods when he's being polite, but has a different view. He said his wife had been making their soap for 30 years. Said it offhand, the way you mention something you stopped noticing a long time ago. She always said the store stuff strips out something that doesn't come back. I didn't respond to that. I just kept with the lotion. But I thought about it that evening. More than made sense. I've written down the full explanation of what Roy's wife was right about. What commercial soap actually does to older skin. What it removes that the skin can't quickly replace. And what to use instead. the measurements, the options for people who'd rather buy than make, what to look for on a label, and what to walk straight past. It's all in the Coleman Remedy book. The link is in the description. I wanted to get it written down properly before I couldn't anymore, and I think I got most of it right. But I hadn't worked any of that out yet the night I sat at the kitchen table thinking about what Roy had said. I only knew something wasn't adding up, and that I'd been knowing it for longer than I'd admitted. The summer I turned 80, I ran out of soap, all of it at once. Shower soap, hand soap, everything. Eleanor had always been the one to notice before the household ran out of things. She had a kind of quiet tracking, what was getting low, what needed replacing. Without her, I'd gotten worse at that. I was still getting worse at it, 4 years on. I drove to the hardware store on Merriman because it was closer than the grocery. They carry a few necessities along the back wall: rope, batteries, light bulbs, and apparently soap. One kind, a plain white Castile bar sitting on a wire shelf next to the handy greaser. Hard rectangle, no fragrance, no claims on the label beyond what it was. The price tag said 52 cents. I bought 3 bars because I didn't want to make the trip again too soon, and I went home. I used the first bar that evening. It didn't foam up the way I was used to. It didn't smell like anything. Rinsed clean and left nothing behind. I thought, this will do until Thursday when I can get to the grocery. Used it the next morning. Used it the following day. On the third evening I stepped out of the shower and reached for the lotion the way I always reached for it, out of 3 years of habit, and I stopped with my hand on the bottle. The itch wasn't there. That low, particular evening itch that had been a part of my life for 3 years. Not diminished, not quieter. Gone. I stood there for a while thinking about that, telling myself it was one good day, that it didn't mean anything. Used the bar the next day and the day after and the 3 days after that. No itch. The tightness across my forearms was loosening, slowly, the way frozen ground loosens in March, without announcement, without drama, just a little at a time, until one morning you press your boot in and the earth gives. After about 10 days, I went out to the workshop. My father's composition notebook has been on the shelf between an old almanac and the first Foxfire book since the week after he died. Black and white cover, worn soft at the corners. The binding cracked from being opened and closed over 50 years of hard work. Earl wrote in that notebook in all capitals, every word, every entry, like he wanted to be sure whoever read it later could see it from a distance. I pulled it down and sat on the stool by the workbench and turned pages slowly, looking for what I was half hoping to find. It was near the back. 3 pages, his capitals running all the way to the margins. The heading said, soap. He'd written about the old way, rendered fat, lye from wood ash, the temperature to work at, how many weeks to let it cure, what to do if the batch went wrong. He wrote that store-bought soap was designed to sell, not to clean, and that anyone who told you otherwise was either fooled themselves or doing the fooling. He wrote about the oils the skin makes, to keep itself whole, and how stripping those oils made money for some people and trouble for everyone else. He wrote, "Mama never needed lotion. She washed with what she made, and her skin was good until the end." Earl Coleman, who left school in 6th grade to help his family through the Depression, had written in that composition notebook the exact thing that took me 80 years and 4 dermatologists to find out by accident on a Tuesday in July. I put the notebook down. I walked back through the garden. The tomatoes were doing well that year. And I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table. Sat in Eleanor's chair, the one on the far side, because sometimes I still do that, because the table makes more sense with weight on both sides of it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired in a particular way. The tiredness of a man who walked a long road and found out there'd been a shorter one the whole time, and the shorter one had been sitting on a shelf in his own workshop, in his own father's handwriting for 30 years. That was 4 years ago. I still buy the 52-cent Castile bar from the hardware store. Sometimes I make my own, using my father's recipe from that notebook when I've got the time and enough rendered fat from the kitchen. It comes out to about the same cost per bar. Takes 3 weeks to cure properly, which is exactly the kind of requirement that would have seemed inconvenient when I was 50, and now seems like the right pace for doing something worth doing. The itch has never come back, not once in 4 years. The tightness across my forearms is gone. My hands, calloused from the workshop in the garden, the way my father's were. They don't crack in winter anymore. Don't bleed at the knuckles the way they did when I was spending $200 a year trying to fix them. My doctor looked at my forearms at my last appointment and said my skin looked good for a man my age. I told him what I'd changed. He wrote it down. I appreciated that more than he knew. I've written it all down, too. My father's recipe, adapted for people who don't have a wood ash lye operation in their backyard, which I understand is most people. The Castile bars you can buy at a hardware store or online for about the same price I pay. What to look for on a label. What to set back on the shelf without reading further. The full picture of why skin changes the way it does after 70, and why most of what the industry offers for it makes the problem worse, not better. Written in plain language, not in the language of someone trying to impress you. It's all in the Coleman Remedy book, along with everything else I've gathered over 30 years. From my father's notebook, from what Eleanor learned in 28 years of nursing and brought home in pieces, and from my own stubborn refusal to accept that getting older meant getting worse without good reason. It's not a medical textbook. I'm not a doctor, and I never said otherwise. It's what one man worked out by paying attention longer than most people get to pay attention. The link is in the description. Read it the way you'd read something someone left on a kitchen table for you. Not looking for a prescription, just looking for company. My granddaughter Lily, she's 11, asks better questions than most adults I've known. She was standing in the bathroom doorway last month watching me wash up before supper. She looked at the bar on the soap dish and she said, "Why is your soap so boring?" I told her it was the most interesting soap I'd ever used. She didn't believe me. I told her about her great-great-grandfather Earl and his notebook and his capitals. I told her about the 50 years of buying products that were solving a problem those very products were causing. She stood there working it out with the focused quiet that 11-year-olds get when something almost makes sense to them. Then she said, "So you fixed it by stopping?" I said, "That's about right." She nodded and filed it away. And I thought about how I wished someone had said that to me 40 years earlier. Not the soap part, the other part. That sometimes the fix isn't another thing you add. Sometimes it's something you finally put down. A man doesn't always earn that knowledge early, but if he's patient enough and stubborn enough and lives long enough, he earns it eventually.